Welcome everyone to Infoblox SP Virtual Summit by Telecom Review. My name is Tony Eid, the founder and CEO of Telecom Review Group. The summit will feature insightful keynotes and a panel of C-level telecom operators and industry leaders who will discuss thoughts and considerations for designing next-generation service providers network. I would like to thank Infoblox and our keynote speakers and panelists for taking part in today's virtual summit. Dr. Sharif Sulaiman, Senior Vice President of International Business Infoblox, Rami Boktor, CTO Vodafone Qatar, Hani Muhammad Yassin, Senior Director Technology Strategy, Etisalat Group. Gunter, he will joining us. Gunter Uttendorf, CTIO Ooredoo Qatar, Yasser Najib Swailim, Cybersecurity Vice President STC, Muhammad Faraj, Customer Experience and Technical Strategy Director, Etisalat Misr, David Ayers, Product Manager Marketing, Infoblox. Now, it will give the floor to Jay, CEO Centrigen, who will be the moderator for today's panel. Thank you, Jay. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Tony, for your intro. Again, hello and a warm welcome to our panelists and to our attendees. For today's session, we're going to focus on designing the next generation service providers network. So by looking at the emerging trends that are affecting service providers today, and we're going to cover various topics from the future of 5G, its impact on the customer experience, its impact on the services being provided, and also the emerging cybersecurity sector that is affecting as well the design of these next generation networks. So I'm going to keep it short as an intro so that I give time to our speakers to express their thoughts. So let me hand over now to Dr. Sharif, who will give us a quick intro on the overall trend. Sharif?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And, we're absolutely honored and delighted to have this esteemed panel of experts and colleagues. This platform is really designed for, to be a thought leadership platform. We're all dealing with so much in the service provider and telco world. And it's really important that we really understand what some of the early adopters are doing when it comes to strategy, planning, and kind of design and rollouts. I think we're all dealing with some very powerful, market trend shifts when it comes to talking about service providers. We can start by talking about the continuous challenge and the chronic challenge that we've been dealing with for a while, which is the declining ARPUs for voice and data. That fundamentally pushes, service provider organizations to contain cost by looking at ways to simplify their infrastructures and attack some of the operational complexity there. On the other hand, they're obviously flocking towards finding new revenue streams and monetizing new services. The other area is the entire, with 5G, the move to, IT and IP. So the telco world becomes a lot more kind of subsumed by the IT world. That has massive ramifications in terms of, the skills, and as organizations actually shift, securing the infrastructures becomes very important. When we take a look at all these dynamics, obviously it requires incredible amount of leadership and a mindset change, for many of us, be it at the individual contributor level, as well as the, leadership level. From that perspective, during this session, we will actually start by talking about what Infoblox as a, service provider focused, vendor doing to help organizations like you to cope with this change, be it in modernizing infrastructures, catering to the specific needs of deploying, future architectures and future services, including obviously 5G as a foundation. And what are we really doing to help you contain cost? Then we will actually segue into a panel of some massive and very well-respected authorities in the telco sector, where they will share with us their views, their experiences around how they're really navigating these trends and these shifts, and be it in pioneering new services or fundamentally, shifting their organizations to embrace this new world. And then we will actually conclude by another session from Infoblox that focuses on what are we really doing to help you monetize new services. So with that said, and without further ado, let me hand it back to you, Jay, so we can kick off the panel. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So let me start now with Etisalat, because I'm glad that we have two people on from Etisalat. So one is from the group level, that's Hani, and another one who's Muhammad from Etisalat Egypt. So this way we're going to get a really good perspective from both sides, where from the group they have a strong in-depth understanding across all the opcos that Etisalat manages, and from a Etisalat Misr operator, what are the challenges they face on the field, on the ground. So let me start with Hani in this case. So Etisalat UAE announced just maybe a few weeks ago that they have the fastest 5G network in the world. It's been deployed, it's available, devices are available. So can you share with us the lessons learned, the challenges that they faced in not just the implementation, but the design, the planning, and the rolling out of that network?
Yes, sure. Hello, Jay. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad for being with you today. I see a lot of familiar faces on the panel, so I appreciate that. So, Jay, we have deployed 5G in both Etisalat UAE and Bali. And later, so you have mentioned that we the highest speed network in the world in Etisalat UAE, partially because of this 5G implementation. However, the roads, until we reached here hasn't been very easy. We started planning way advanced to reach here. So there are still a lot of challenges that we see in other opcos in our footprint to achieve what Mobile and the Etisalat UAE has achieved in terms of the 5G deployment. The biggest challenge that we still see is spectrum. We have been talking about spectrum for a long time, but it's still a big issue in some of our footprint. Because we have been blessed in Etisalat UAE and Mobile because the government has been proactive in providing a huge spectrum in Saudi Arabia and UAE, and this spectrum was available when we first were working on 5G deployments. But in other opcos and other footprints, we're still struggling to find the spectrum, the right spectrum, in the sub-6 gigahertz. Just give you an example of an FWA business case that we have done, evaluated recently, to achieve good performance and for the business case to make sense. You cannot deploy an FWA on a sub-6 gigahertz, spectrum for less than, I would say, 60 megahertz of spectrum. Below that, the business sense will not, and also, you're not gonna get the performance that you're gonna hope for to pair with your fiber, deployment. Another challenge that we are seeing, 5G, because 5G, the promise is that you're going to be onboarding many more services. In the past, the two services that we were concentrating on when we deployed networks were voice and data, and and this is changing very rapidly with 5G. Now we're talking about many more services that we have to cater for, and those services come with varying requirements. So you're talking about voice data, you're talking about AR, you're talking about gaming, you're talking about consumer versus enterprise, you're talking about private networks versus public networks. So all of these dimensions that 5G brings, make the by nature the 5G network architecture is very complicated. Also, deployments are not only on what services that you do, but also based on how the data will be processed. Now we're talking about, how are we going to process this data? Are we going to process this data on the edge? Are we going to send it all the way to the network? Are we going to, process it through Telecom? Are we going to process it through, the cloud? All of these considerations, they need to take shape before we even, start deploying 5G networks on a large scale. Of course, added complexity is that when you open your network to a lot of other users, for example, all the verticals that we hope we're going to be catering for, how do you offer the quality of service and the slicing and how you do orchestration will become very important. For example, if you consider the use case of a drone company, for example, that they want to use our network to use drones for deliveries, theoretically they should be able to reserve a slice on our network to be able to do that. And maybe that slice, from their perspective, I want a certain quality of service only at a certain location, because I might not be covering the whole city, and and I want this slice only at a certain point of time. So now you have to cater to so many different verticals with such requirements that can access your system and can reserve, do an SLA and reserve this quality of service, on the fly. And then when they're done, we have to tear down those resources and make those resources available for somebody else. And that adds more, complexity to the 5G deployment. One less technical consideration, but very important one, is tower load and power consideration for the sites. Right now, to cater for massive MIMO and beamforming, most of the vendors are going with this active antenna unit architecture or products where they combine the RF processing in the same unit. They are more efficient. They're more than just having remote radio head by itself or an antenna by itself. So we have to dimension for that when we in our network. Sets, I think Dr. Sharif has alluded to that. When we talk about the concepts of virtualization, cloud, orchestration, big data analytics, machine learning, edge computing, these are key skill sets. These are all IT concepts that we're bringing into the telecom world. And a lot of us, maybe we don't have the right experience to do that. So we're having to actually train or retrain our employees to be able to address these new requirements and to think more about in terms of IT rather than just telco. So we're hiring a lot of people who are IT engineers by nature, and then we have to train them the telco concept, or teach them the telco concepts. And last but not least, of course, cost. Cost is a big driver for 5G network. New technology of 5G and complexity that I just described. Two combinations will drive, both CapEx and OpEx cost. So we need to kind of, tailor our investment that we are, we are targeting. We cannot achieve, 10 second user throughput and one millisecond latency from day one ubiquitously. We have to provide a 5G network with a reasonable performance consumers. And then on top of that, we have to make investments layer by layer to address certain number of those verticals that I have mentioned. And that takes time and also takes a lot of kind of iteration on the business case and business model and how we're gonna make the investment in the network. Thank you, Jay. You're on mute.
Yeah, we're still getting used to it a year later, and we're still trying to get used to it. But you brought up two main points here, which I think are extremely relevant. One is the deployment of new additional services that were not present on the previous generation networks, and their impact, not just on the network, their impact on the organization. So what you mentioned about diffusing now or infusing IT skills into the network engineering team, this is something that we're starting to see quite a bit in terms of impact on the success or not of the deployment of these services. So I'm going to get back to that at the end, because this is a point that I think would deserve a session on its own, but it would be good to hear that highlight towards the end. But when we're talking about the new services, this is where I would like to get Mohammed's point of view in terms of what would be these business opportunities. What is the economic value that 5G is bringing based on what Hani had said? Unmute again.
Yep. Hello, Jay. Hello, everybody. It's my really honor to be one of the panelists here. Back to your question. Currently, Egypt is aggressively working in developing the infrastructure in all regions, with a special focus in the new capital and the new urban areas. Developing the infrastructure will create many business opportunities that will help to reduce the unemployment rate and attract foreign investments, which will enhance in return the GDP value of the Egypt country. Hence, the out-of-pocket appetite will be increased, and having the right technology in place will capture these opportunities and accordingly will enhance the ARPU generated by our customers. Having a strong telecom infrastructure is an evidence for having a proper expansion strategy in Egypt. I'm sure that the Egyptian market will be ready soon to introduce the 5G technology if we move forward with the current pace of development. We believe in Etisalat that the technology came with its promise. For example, the 5G technology is promising to fulfill our main core objectives and also beyond the core objectives. One of our main business objectives is to accommodate the expected traffic growth with enhanced customer experience and with the least possible cost. The customer experience enhancement will ensure our futuristic healthy growth that's considered one of the most important strategic objectives here in Egypt. While accommodating the traffic growth will secure our revenue targets, and the least possible cost will reflect positively on the profitability that our shareholders mainly concerned about. When it comes to beyond the core business objectives and the adjacent services, I think Hani mentioned already the many services that will be coming with the 5G. I think it is all about proposing the proper solution or technologies to fulfill the customer new requirements in the 5G era. And I think the enterprise opportunities that will be generated in the newly developed areas, smart cities, IoT new prospect in Egypt, all of these opportunities will be enriched and accommodated by the 5G, I think. As Hani mentioned as well, fixed wireless access. Fixed wireless access opportunity will be a practical use case in the 5G, where the 5G will give us the opportunity to have a higher bandwidth, fiber-like speeds in the wireless technology with reduced cost per gig. In addition to some other applications that will be supported by 5G, like mission critical applications, where the network slicing will enable these types of services to come to reality and the people could use it safely and securely. which in return will come with its value creation to our business here in Egypt. Yep.
Okay, so I think then the potential is there, and the economic value of deploying is going to return profitability to the 5G network deployment. So taking it from a different perspective, so going to Rami from Vodafone, maybe looking at then seeking these new revenue streams in light of declining overall ARPUs at the consumer level, by introducing new services and new enterprise, like what Hani mentioned as well. So in order to trigger these new revenue streams, what is Vodafone's strategy to launch these new services?
Okay, first, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'll start from where Tony has ended. When he said 5G is a golden moment in the history for telcos to revive their growth again. And exactly or precisely what Hani said is a correct thing. This is the first time we see IT and telco converging, more or less. What is this type of conversion? Okay, you look at the 5G standalone core standards. It's 100% IT standards. It's a group of small applications talking to each other with REST APIs. We have never used the standard term REST APIs in our history. Probably it's Chinese to some of us. Okay, why this has happened? Because the technology has evolved in a way that now software is the key. Okay. Our strategy is a little bit different from what Hani and Mohammed has explained. Yes, we appreciate the high speed coming from 5G. That's highly appreciated. But the last thing we want is we end up being a small pipe or a faster pipe than we used to be. Because we always, as an industry, not only as Vodafone, complained about being a pipe and leaking out our revenue streams to OTTs. And we used to call them OTTs because they come on top of us. On the other hand, or from the angle of what we call OTTs, they call us someone in the middle. Okay, because we don't add too much to the value chain rather than being a small pipe. Now with the 5G standard, the beauty about IT, it's historically open standards. So it's open for everyone. It's more standardized than the history of telcos. Okay, it's all about software. So we in Vodafone are first transforming ourselves on skills, because this is very important. As Hani mentioned, if we don't upskill our teams, we are out of this game. And upskilling is IT in broad term and software engineering in the other term. And we always talk about agile in telcos. Okay, we inherit this, or we try to copy the IT industry guys when we say agile. But agile is a tip of the iceberg. One, because we usually talk about agile as a kind of a fashion, not really agile. Okay, it has a lot behind it. We see agile as a vehicle for innovation, and I'll come to this in a minute. But we see innovation is key, and we think technology now is at the best situation or the ever to enable innovation. How? One, it has never become cheaper to develop a software because everything is on cloud. You don't need to invest in hardware. You don't need to buy servers. You don't need to do anything. You can develop a piece of hardware, software, place it on any cloud, wherever you think, and it would work. Okay, and this is how the startups are operating now. And now is the buzzword in the world is startups. Okay, when you think about digitalization, again, it's all revolving behind how to make everything accessible and readable. Okay, because in the modern world, data is very important. When we say software engineering, we are shifting from code-based algorithms to data-based algorithms. This is what artificial intelligence is. So back to this, we think we are an enablers as technology, One, by providing the skills to develop software, consequently to innovate. Second, by providing enablers for the software engineers, which is easy to access cloud. That's number one. An easy microservices IT architecture. This is the second foundation of our strategy. And when we talk microservices, it looks like a very IT term, but it's in the core of what we want to do. Because if you don't have our microservices, you cannot be really agile. It's a dream if we think we are agile if we don't have microservices. So we are transforming everything we have into microservices. And then microservices will not work without cloud. So everything is transforming into cloud native. Put the three things together, agile, microservices, on cloud, it's quite easy to develop something new. And then put under this as a foundation the new standard of 5G, which is open. Like the 5G new standard treats voice, which is our historical revenue stream, as an application. Okay, so and it's open. The standard is open to introduce whatever applications on voice using the HTTP or REST APIs standards. So even voice, which is our bread and butter, is becoming just an application. Consequently, we have a big chance, has never been like this in the history, to put ourselves as application developers, capitalizing on the open standards of 5G to create more revenue streams. And one of these key applications, which was never possible before because of the latency things, is IoT. So when you combine software architecture as an enabler with IoT as a strategy to create new revenue streams, next to 5G, you will have an end-to-end stronger contribution to the value chain. This is where we want to take ourselves in the future, primarily by more skilling and more bias towards software.
Great. So basically here then, in this case, security now is becoming a new B2B and B2C model, business model that SPs are driving towards. So what are the top security services that are in demand today? So this question is for Yasser. I mean, you're VP of cybersecurity at STC. What is it that wakes you up at night? What are your top priorities in terms of deploying these services?
Yeah, thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, let me give you an idea about where we are heading as the STC. We have a strategy for the coming 3 years to expand aggressively in the scope and scale. So I'm not sure if you guys heard the announcement of the establishment of the new cybersecurity entity in STC. This company basically, the role of this company is to complement the different digital services of STC and to be the enabler of the digital ecosystem, not only in the kingdom, but in the other territory where we are serving in that countries. So basically, when it comes to the most demanded services, there are core services, I would say, like the managed security service. Basically, it's the monitoring services and the security operations services. However, right after or during the pandemic, we've seen lots of organizations that shifted from investing in security technologies into the OpEx model, where they started to outsource most of their security services to the main security or to the major security service providers. And in that, given that fact, we faced some, it's an opportunity and challenge in the same times. Opportunity because we are in Saudi and serving Saudi customers and serving other customers also in Kuwait and Bahrain through our arms there, STC Kuwait and STC Bahrain. But in the same time, it was challenging for the multinational companies to serve some critical national infrastructure and government organizations due to the local regulations. So it's an opportunity for the local players, and it's a big challenge for the multinational companies to serve in the local countries, in the local market here in Saudi. The Other emerging, I would say, services that we've seen in the recent period is the anti-DDoS service. So it became a trend, especially nowadays when the pandemic brought an opportunity for the service providers to enable the economies of the countries to pass this period. So lots of attacks we've witnessing start targeting the service providers themselves, the critical national infrastructures. And here, the investment in the anti-DDoS start paying off, and we've seen it. We invested in 2017 in building a large capacity of scrubbing center located in Saudi. So we have the capacity to mitigate up to 4 terabit of malicious traffic in scrubbing center in the country. And this gave us the ability to serve not only the government, but even the large enterprises in Saudi. We've seen also a trend of new products, or an augmented, I would say, product called the clean pipe, where different services are augmented together, are bundled together, along with the connectivity, and to be provided for the end customers. So the connectivity plus the anti-DDoS plus web security plus email security plus other services as well. What we did, in addition to this, we started investing on the large amount of data that we have, given the fact that 60 to 70% of the national traffic are passing through STC. So we started monetizing the large amount of data to start understanding what sort of threats are targeting the nation, and what differentiate those kind of threats versus the other countries. So what we did basically is to monetize the large amount of data, and we started producing what we call it indicator of compromises. We start feeding the different subsidiaries across the region with those indicators of compromises. We start sharing with our partners through, for example, the GSMA malware sharing platform, or through first.org, where more than 500 organizations are sharing their intelligence. And we started to use those intelligence to feed our DNS. So the DNS nowadays became our first line, I would say, of defense. We started to block lots of what we call it command controls. And this enables also the government and I would say the digital ecosystem in the country by having a clean traffic that passes through the DNS. And the DNS is getting this kind of intelligence from our threat intelligence platforms, and our threat intelligence platform is getting the data from the monetized data and from our partners as well. At the same time, we are even started to work with our some of the large enterprises here in the country. At the same time, we have 2 ways of communication with the national cybersecurity authorities, where we share those kind of intelligence, and they started to spread it across the other operators in the country. So back to the point, managed security service is keep trending. Anti-DDoS nowadays started to be among the top, I would say, 3 or 5 most demanded services. The clean pipe, including the email security, web security, and the shift in the market from the OPEX model to the, from the CAPEX model to the OPEX model, including the large enterprises, where they started to look for more optimization and more cost reduction. So they start looking for what other options they could embrace to reduce the cost and to drive more efficiency within their security organization.
So these are great insights into what cybersecurity can enable, and with DNS permeation, as you mentioned, it becomes, I would like to understand the impact of, so for example, as these technologies evolve, so Hani, the question is to you then, how do you see the role of Open RAN as we see it start to evolve in terms of the future of 5G and in terms of these bundling of services and the impact of security services around them.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So the long-term goal of Open RAN is, of course, to one, to reduce the total cost of ownership by potentially having many more vendors and doing competition among different new vendors in the telecom space, bringing more innovation by introducing those vendors, because each vendor might be concentrating or working on one piece of the puzzle instead of one vendor trying to do everything on their own end to end, especially with the added complexity of the 5G network and ecosystem. So all of these goals, of course, they are, they go hand in hand with the 5G goals that we have mentioned before in terms of, network densifying the network and addressing different, services and verticals. So here at Etisalat, we have been looking at Open RAN for quite some time now. We have joined the telecom infrastructure project a while back. We have been contributing to the GSMA Open Networks working group. We have conducted a group RFI on Open RAN last year. We learned a lot through that exercise because we met almost all of the main ecosystem stakeholders in the Open RAN ecosystem. We have been conducting trials in several of our opcos. Some of them we announced, some of them we have not announced. We also have some more collaboration announcement that we'll do this year. So all in all, we have been really looking very closely on Open RAN, and this solution or this ecosystem is very promising. Of course, we're evaluating Open RAN for both LTE and 5G, not 5G only, because in many opcos, in our footprint, 5G is not available yet. So we have to also consider LTE as well. However, what we have seen so far is that since this complete openness in the open, in the Open RAN concept, is not there yet. We're finding out that mixing and matching among vendors are still, very difficult at this stage because of some of the open interfaces haven't been completely defined. So we're trying to evaluate two paths to go into open virtualized RAN. The one path is to focus on the open protocol to evaluate the new vendors. So we are we're looking at the interface between the BBU and the RU, or what you call DUCU and the RU, the remote radio unit. That's one path, just to evaluate this open front hole. And the second path is really working with our current vendors, the incumbent vendors, on their virtualization roadmap, because we also want to see, what is the roadmap for our current vendors, and we understand that they might not be ready with the open interfaces yet. However, they can be doing virtualization as the first step. So by evaluating that path on the virtualization with those vendors, we can understand more about how we can operate our network in the future, how we can do software upgrade and deployment ourselves, how we can test software, all of these functions that traditionally have been done end to end by our vendors. So we want to gain experience from that perspective as well. So those are the two paths to open vRAN that we are considering now. Also, from our analysis, it's easier to deploy Open RAN on greenfield or as a 5G standalone network, as a layer on top of existing network, because it's very difficult to bring this Open RAN concept to an area of the network where already mature and other vendors are already there. We're not at that stage yet. So the use cases we're looking at this stage, we think that Open RAN can be ideal, for example, for private networks, because those are greenfield networks that we can deploy, or we can manage right away. We can look at indoor coverage scenarios instead of doing the typical indoor coverage implementation. Maybe you can do small cells using Open RAN, or of course, fixed wireless access. We think that's also a good first use case that can be implemented using Open RAN.
Well, thanks, Ali. I mean, this is definitely straight to the point. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Gunter Uttendorf, who joined us just now. And he's CTIO of Ooredoo in Qatar. Welcome, Gunter.
Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone.
So maybe
Hi, welcome, Gunter. How are you?
Oh, good.
Good. You are teasing us. Okay, sorry, Jay.
No, that's okay. Let me start then, Gunter, with a high-level question in terms of the innovation is really what's driving 5G deployment. So, and Ooredoo has been involved quite a bit in accelerating that innovation. So what are the key technology areas that you are engaging in to accelerate that growth and that innovation?
It's a very good question, and there's a big multitude of answers to that. So let me focus on a few topics that I think are very, very important to driving that growth. And I think one of those is densification of the networks. What we want and expect from 5G is that we have really good services, nearly ubiquitous. And we have been pushing on these boundaries via several tools. So I think the traditional toolbox of the operator has to be broadened to open up the world of 5G opportunities. What I mean on the one hand is I see with 5G the need for much more concentration on small cells, because you want to provide this 5G bandwidth and latency very much close to the customers, and small cells are the tool to do that. And I think small cell deployment will see quite a rise with 5G. And I think it's necessary already in, let's say, a conventional 5G network, but even more necessary as we push things further out to the edge. And the more we will offer our customers services that are ultra low latency, the more we will go to the edge, the more important it will be to have a good small cell strategy. So that's an important tool in the toolbox. Another important tool in the toolbox, the paradox of 5G standardization is that it's trying to achieve so many things. On the one hand, the ultra high bandwidth, ultra high speed. On the other, the ubiquitous network. For the ubiquitous networks, we have been pushing together with our vendor partners, DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing. And I think that is also a very important technology that will allow 5G networks already from the beginning to be quite ubiquitous, available for customers. And there are many other technologies in the core that also will become really important to deliver growth. One of them, of course, network slicing. But there, I think this will be majority of them will be important for in the B2B business, while the small cells I see also for the consumers. And I think this is necessary that you have a broad toolbox to unleash the growth potential. And we are certainly looking forward to that. We did a lot of that work in recent events. Last year or 2019, there were the World Athletics in Doha, and we equipped the stadium with more than 600 smart antennas. Why did we do that? To deliver the bandwidth that the customers at that event need. And I think it's a good showcase for what 5G needs, because when you have then this fast network there, ubiquitous available with low latency, What we built then on applications on top of it was a virtual stadium where you would go to a shopping mall and have the same impression like you were sitting in the stadium, enabled by our 5G network. What we built was a connected ambulance via 5G, where you can do telemedical services via 5G network. So this gives us an idea how growth can be enabled by these innovations.
Great. So I think here when you're trying now to connect all these different elements together, so you have the connected medical service providers, you have the connected stadium, so you've got the connected enterprise, and then you've got the connected consumer. This is bringing in a lot of data into the network, and this is also allowing cloud computing to actually becomes quite prevalent. So my question here to Rami is, who's also from Qatar and has experienced what you, Gunter, have been talking about. So is there still room to provide value-added services that are managed and hosted in this case?
Well, the room is coming smaller eventually because hyperscalers are aggressive on this area, but I don't think it's ever going to be negligible or die. It's always going to be a room for us to provide value-added services on the cloud. Probably a niche market, not for everyone, not for the global market, but still it's going to be there. And again, if you look at the history, in the 60s, the IBM mainframe was there, which is another version of the cloud, but there was a challenge with the connectivity. And then the PCs came in, and the applications on PCs became higher processing power, and PCs were not sufficient. At the same time, connectivity started growing. So we went back to cloud, okay? So it's always a never-ending game between applications and processing power and connectivity, okay? So probably in the very short term, will be there, and another demand will come and it will be out, and then another demand will go, and it will continue being like this, back and forth, back and forth. I don't think it will ever stop as a business line. That's my opinion. Maybe different in magnitude, different in requirements, different in needs, but it's not going to be to ever diminish or vanish, especially with edge computing and 5G. I think this gives us more opportunity than the hyperscalers because we are closer to the customer in this case, because we have the connectivity and we have the presence already. So it's going to be there, but on a niche market, not for everyone.
In a niche market, but as you mentioned, there will be another cycle of another the technology. So it's a matter of finding that new cycle and then getting on board the ramp towards that.
And 5G, I think 5G is a start of a new cycle, in my opinion, because 5G brings more value if you combine it with edge computing. Okay, and edge computing, the role for service providers is bigger than the role of hyperscalers in this sense. So this is a big opportunity for every service provider, more on edge computing than on core cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question here is for Yasser in this case. Then, as we, I mean, it's been mentioned by our speakers that there is a new IT principles, a new set of IT skills that are getting into the telco engineering side, software, virtualization. So all these technologies, the open end has been talked about. Add to it the bundle of services that are coming on board, and the more services, the higher security risks that you have on the network. So what are the top measures that you are taking? So it's no longer about the priority or implementation. So what are the measures you are taking in your strategy to secure that infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with my colleagues when they talked about the common similarities that we are seeing nowadays with the 5G and emerging technologies and with the IT industries. Telecom in the past was the least, I would say, priority for most of the attackers. Most of the attacks goes to the application, then the operating system, databases, then the network, then the telecom network. And in the past, we were seeing the attacks that targets the signaling network and diameter networks with the 4G. But nowadays, with the emerging technologies, and there are lots of similarities between the telco industry and the IT industries. What we are doing, I second my colleagues, is to force our telco people to learn IT, not the opposites. And of course, it requires also for the IT people to learn telco, but the telecom people, they have to understand how the IT architecture basically is being built. So the similarity between the IT and telecom imposes a new kind of threats. Now the telecom infrastructure and the ecosystem are exposed to more threats than before, especially with the adoption of the 5G, especially if there is a use cases that requires a different kind of IoTs placed, in different locations. That will bring the threat landscape more, risky than before. So basically, there are two tracks when it comes to security. First of all, securing the core infrastructure and within the service providers, and this requires multi-tiering of controls, where the architecture has to be well defined. Especially nowadays, I think my colleagues Rami, he did mention that it's an open architectures, I would say, especially with the 5G. There is no clear standardization. And what we are doing basically with the local regulator, CITC, is to start looking for a unified architecture that we as a service providers in Saudi, we should follow. I'm talking about the security part of it, especially with the standalone setup of the 5G. At the same time, we started to adopt some of the, I would call them new guidelines, some of the guidelines that been announced by either the GSMA or some of the 5G equipment service providers. At the same time, securing the entire I would say, supply chain. So we have a responsibility as a service provider. The end user who's leveraging on the 5G use case, he has to do an additional controls and additional measures on top of the service provider's measure to secure his custom, I would say, use case. So it's not only the service provider's responsibility to secure the 5G use cases, but even the large enterprises who's building their own custom use cases, they have a responsibility to adopt and to apply additional measures of security. So if I could summarize it, it's a three different tracks. The first track is under the responsibility of the service provider themselves by building multi-tiering security architecture. The second track with the customer themselves, they have to add their additional measure to secure their use cases. And the third track, which has to be applied on the 5G equipment manufacturers. I'm talking about the 5G technology giants, which we all know. They have a responsibility to make sure that the end-to-end product line is being secured and doesn't have any kind of backdoors that might be used as an entry point to harm either the customer or the service provider's network.
Okay, great. So I think now as we take a quick pause, I just wanted to highlight to our attendees that they can send their questions on the Q&A chat box so that we can address them at the end of the panel. And also, if I wanted to give an opportunity for the panelists based on all the discussions that have happened, if they have any views to add or that they want to think about to share with our audience before we move to the next set of questions. Because I have here a couple of quite interesting ones that I will probably do at the end of the panel.
Yeah, so, I have just one point here to add. It's a kind of suggestion, especially I'm seeing senior executives from different companies here in the region. I think embracing the collaboration kind of collaboration initiative, especially when it comes to security, how to secure the 5G, especially there is no crystal clear standard for the 5G security. And when it comes to security, it's not about the competition. I think all of us are fighting the same, I would call them enemies or bad people. So having a platform to exchange something similar to this platform, to exchange the experience and to agree on some of the guidelines and 5G security, that would serve our customers, and whether large enterprise customers or consumers. So this is something that just came to my mind. Maybe Telecom Review or Infoblox can take it into consideration.
So actually, this is a very good point in this case, in terms of collaboration to drive an ecosystem around 5G, rather than each operator deploying its own set of services, which can cause not just a disconnect in terms of a consumer experience, but there is a lot of lessons learned that can be shared. So I would say, Gunter, what do you think in terms of that collaboration? How do you think it can be enabled?
I think it's a very good point, because in the 5G world, I think we will see a lot more partnering and collaboration, because the solutions, the vertical solutions, are getting more complex. So you will need to develop these solutions, for example, in IoT or man-machine interfaces, kind of not on a standalone basis for one operator, but kind of as regional or global solutions. I think there is a lot of work ongoing in Gremia, like the NGMN, that are trying to foster those collaborations. At the end of the day, it will be an iterative process where you will develop a solution probably for one customer and then develop it into something more universally possible. Or you will develop a solution with solution providers that are trying to help an industry. And I think those kind of things we are now seeing starting. But I like Yasser's comment. It's certainly something that we should keep in mind and foster for specific functionalities like security, but also others come to mind. I mean, there is probably a need for enhanced ways to find, to make really something like more advanced IoT solutions possible across country borders. And there, I think 5G collaboration could be really very helpful to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a topic that we probably need to take offline and have a discussion at the regional level, because all these standards bodies like NGMN, they address it at a global level. But then when it comes to the specifics of the region, which are quite common, what is it that we can do to make things happen? So in this case, then since I have Gunter, then there are many technologies that are coming up, that are emerging, as well as the business opportunities. So how do you work on the alignment between opportunity on one hand and technology on the other hand? And how do you prioritize?
Yes, I think the key to doing that successful is talk. So you need good communication between your business team and your technology team, so that both teams are trying to coordinate not only once a year in a strategy session, but during the year. What are the things we are trying to achieve? What are the opportunities? What are the needs of customers that sometimes the technology team might not be that well aware of, but the business team is aware of? And then you bring this together and you try to find a solution or a solution provider for this. And that can be, especially in the IoT field, many things that are kind of needed to be brought together: the right sensors, the right actors, the right platform. There are a lot of initiatives that try to do that, but I think the key to it is communication and constant communication. So we have implemented weekly and monthly meetings to keep track of that, and to align the technology forces very closely on the needs of the customers. On the other hand, to align the business team with the capabilities technology already has or very shortly will have. And that's the way how we try to get these two streams together to deliver the best for our customers.
Okay, great. So in this case, then, what we see is that the alignment between technology and the business opportunity is really bringing in the service then closer to the edge of the network and the user, because at the end, it's about bringing in a new customer experience. It's about bringing in a new user experience that wasn't there with the previous generation of networks. So with that in mind, I'll go back to Muhammad, because that's really what you do at the end for Etisalat Misr, which is, what is your approach to ensure a positive user experience when these services come closer to the edge?
Well, I think this is a very good question and also tricky one, because defining the positive experience by itself is a challenge. It is usually related to the customer preference and the customer expectations. And recently, as we all know, the customer's demands are being developed greatly, especially after COVID-19 and its impact on generating different use cases, and increases the mandate to have a reliable and fast and low latency networks. I think in other words, faster speed, lower latency, and the capacity of the network to handle massive number of connected devices, in addition to proactively addressing the customer's requirements to ensure consistent service delivery, will define the customer experience in the future. And the 5G technology, I think, is the answer to all these challenges.
Okay.
As Jonathan just mentioned, that it's not only about having a network that's providing higher speeds and low latency, because the 5G by design will provide a higher user throughput, capitalizing of the higher bandwidths allocated to the technology. Like what Han is saying, it is one of the challenges, yes, but it is what 5G technology is coming with. Thanks as well to the 5G architecture that will enable to offer the least latency ever that we can experience. I will not go deeply with the technology of mobile edge computing or virtualization, CUPS. All of this is going to move the content to the edge, which will reduce the latency dramatically. I think our major challenge in the 5G technology is, or one of the opportunities, it's a challenge and it's also opportunity, is the network slicing. It is now enabled by the 5G, and I think Ooredoo Qatar as well is saying that this is one of the opportunities that will allow users to get specifically what they need with the exact configuration to fulfill the required stability, latency, bandwidth, coverage, and also at the right price. Let me give you one of the examples. The requirements of smart cars are totally different from those users who need the right latency or bandwidth for any home applications like waste management. So in this case, we will be able to assign a slice from the virtualized network to allocate the proper resources to be used for smart cars and others for home applications. All of this will result in much better utilization of the network resources, and in return, it will improve the customer experience. Managing the network nodes is no more considered the only concern for us. The proactive fulfillment of the customer requirements is our main point of differentiation in the next era with the 5G. It will ensure a consistency for our service delivery. And this is one of our clear strategy here in Etisalat Misr. Our commitment to the digital transformation journey and our ability to make use of the network information that we are going to have will be our technique to address proactively the customer requirements. So I think here AI networks, AI network analytics, automation will be crucial to manage the customer experience with such a huge number of connections and sensitivity of the use cases. AI will not only detect the problems, but it will also determine and predict the customer requirements, and automatically will take the next best actions to ensure the continuity of our superior service delivery. So I think this will shape our positive user experience in the future, inshallah.
So I think this is a good segue into the wrap up of the panel, which is we have two relevant questions. So Mohammed, what you mentioned in terms of it's not just about the network architecture, but it also takes much more than that, in terms of planning to impact the user experience. But we have two related questions, which is if 5G, and this is open to anyone on the panel that wants to take it. So if 5G is moving more towards the consumer side and the enterprise side, what will be the impact on the 5G latency, and what is its impact on its backhaul networks, and as that tremendous amount of data starts to hit the network? Will they be able to cope? Do they need an upgrade? What's your view in terms of backhaul and in terms of user experience on 5G as the latency starts to get lower when you move it to the cloud or you move it to the edge?
For sure, the telecom infrastructure has to be ready to introduce the 5G. And the fiber to the site is the key word here to have a proper backhauling technologies, to have such amount of huge capacity required for the 5G. Moving the content to the edge will reduce the latency dramatically and will give us the opportunity to analyze the traffic and look into and predict also the requirements of the customers and proactively addressing what they are looking for. And by introducing the machine learning algorithms will assign the proper service to the proper customers automatically and without our intervention, because we cannot manage all these huge connections. But with machine learning algorithms, they will discover and also detect what they are looking for, and it will automatically configure and ensure fulfillment of these requirements.
Okay. Any other comments to add on what Mohammed had mentioned?
No, Jay, I actually have a different question altogether, if it's okay. So we've focused a lot on the technology side. You know, we have around 80 people who are, you know, service provider professionals attending, kind of listening to us. And I know that probably what's top of mind for them is, as, you know, senior executives in many service provider organizations, you as panelists, you know, what advice do you have for these professionals when it comes to, you know, rewiring their skill sets? You know, what kind of skill sets are you looking for? What does the service provider, you know, professional of the future look like, given the shift, you know, from telco to IT? What are some of those areas that we need to kind of share with the audience so they can focus on how they really invest in their relearning? Anyone on the panel?
If you allow, I think there are several key things that you need to be prepared for this world. And one of them, I think, is everything around NFV, network function virtualization. So virtualization technologies are very, very important in the future. I think technologies, client-server technologies for the better use of the edge of the network will be very important for the future. I believe what was mentioned before, I think by Yasser, security will be very important. So if you want to become well prepared, I think those three areas are certainly a good starting point. And building on that, you can then specialize in different areas. But I think the skill sets in those will be very important today and in the future in the 5G world.
Good.
Yeah, this is Yas. If you allow me, I think beside the IT and telcos, and as my colleague mentioned, of course, security touches every area of the technology domains. Also data. We are producing large amount of data that we never experienced before. So I think data governance and everything around data, whether data quality, data privacy, this has to be in mind of any service provider or technologist, I would say. He has to understand the different aspects of data, not from the privacy side, but even from the quality side as well, especially nowadays with the different regulations of data. I think this is one of the key pillars that we should keep in mind.
I totally agree with you. I think data is, for me, you can't monetize technology without focusing on the data, so that goes hand in hand with some of the things that Gunter has actually spoken about. Good. Jay, back to you.
I have a quick question. Actually, it's a fun question, and it's a question that was asked back when 4G was getting introduced, and it was as well asked when 3G was introduced. So now as 5G is launching, this is a good question that's being asked in terms of, we talked about monetization opportunities going in the direction of now a bundle of services, not just voice and data. So as we're starting to hear about 6G now, and in terms of development of the standards, you're starting to see some webinars going and starting to talk about what comes next after 5G. So how do we ensure that we monetize 5G? Because the investments and the costs and the challenges of deploying 5G are great, and much greater than what was done in earlier networks. And connected to it is a question around, is IoT going to generate that traffic that's going to enable that monetization? And where do you see that direction before we start talking about the 6G networks? Anyone wants to take it?
Yeah, if you allow me to, yep, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll try to answer the IoT question, because I think the 6G question is a bit more political at this point. So the IoT question. So I think we need to distinguish between two kind of IoTs, right? So when we think about the IoTs, we're thinking about those sensors that can be embedded in a power meter in a basement somewhere, sending a very small amount of data every 2 days. Of course, you're still gonna have all of these type of machines and IoT type machines, but I think the monetization will come more from a different type of IoT devices. We're talking about all of those robots in factories. We're talking about all of these medical machines in hospitals. So these kind of machines, they are edge machines, and they have computing power, and they generate a huge amount of data. So this data, that those generate, these machines generate, you need to process, you need to organize, you need to do something with them. So that's where the big opportunity, in my opinion, for the operators come, where how we can work with these verticals, doing, providing our experience in machine learning and big data analysis, where we can guide them towards, how they can, make good use of this data. The typical IoT traffic, which is, the small amount of traffic, yes, we can monetize, but it's going to be, again, going back to this, connectivity pipe model, and I don't think it's gonna generate much value to the opcos.
So Hamad, you wanted something to add?
Yeah, I think like what have been mentioned before is the innovation, because you are going to expose your network to the startups or third party in order to make use of or sweating your assets. So they can make use of your network directly, just to put your framework and define how they can make use of the network. And I think by which you are going to onboard lots of ideas and lots of innovations, and you can incubate activities or startups and bringing forward some value to the end user. So I think like what we have mentioned previously, we are not anymore providing voice and data commodities. On top, we are going to compete with the OTTs. Now we have to be more agile, and we have to be as a technical guys, we have to ensure knowing the whole information coming from the IT and vice versa. I think the IT guys as well should study well what does it mean by technology or engineering. Both of them has to merge the information together in order to leverage what we are having right now in terms of information, to make use of this information and monetize this information in the right way.
Rami, I felt like when I mentioned 6G and IoT, you had something to say. So.
Yeah, because it's just you said whether 5G will generate enough traffic to monetize what we invested or not. And the word traffic, to be honest, struck me because we think on a bit different line. Okay, traffic on its own is not going to generate that much as a traffic, but the value added on top of the traffic is going what is going to monetize what we invested. Okay, so our thought process is how to add value on top of this traffic and make it more valuable by giving a clean pipe, giving a secure pipe, monetizing the data, innovate on the IoT. But I don't think if we stick to traffic only or just high-speed connectivity, it's going to be another failure, I would say. We have to add something on top of it. IoT is one of them. Security as a service is another thing. But it's not only traffic, definitely. This is not the thing. And I think 5G, again, I'll reiterate, is the starting point of a new era, unless we contain it into traffic and high-speed bandwidth.
No, you're 100% right. So this is a mindset we're talking about. The word traffic and data was on the 4G network. It made sense on the 4G network because that's how you can monetize it. On 5G, it's more about the services, monetizing the service rather than monetizing the data itself. So hopefully we are at that inflection point, and that for some reason we don't get dragged back into how to monetize data itself, because we will lose a lot of the value that 5G brings in this case. So we have time just for one last question that we're going to ask, which is, Yasser mentioned and talked about what NTC plan in terms of security and how to manage that security and prevent it on the network. There is this question in terms of what are you doing today to protect consumer users, not just the network, but the consumers, the mobile users from attack, from ransomware, even on 4G, not just necessarily 5G.
Yeah, well, if you allow me here, I'll give an example of what we are doing here in STC Group, basically. Some of the protections activities, the end user or the consumers, they don't feel it. But just give you an example. We built something, we called it here in Saudi, the spam shield. So basically, this is an SMS spam shield that prevents the illegitimate SMSs that may harm the end users. We worked with the local regulators here, the CITC, to govern even the SMS. So you won't get, an illegitimate SMS that seems to be spoofed from the bad people. And even the large corporation, if they need to send an ad, you have the option to opt out. So you can work in, I would say, in a silent way. And even the ad has to be tagged with AD. So the end user can differentiate between the advertisement and the other SMSs that are sent by either the banking sectors or other government services. That's number one. Number two, maybe I gave an example of what we are doing here in STC when it comes to SMS, to DNS, sorry. I just want to give you one example. If the end user is, or the consumer is receiving an SMS from a legitimate sender with malicious link, so there is no way within the telecom technologies to prevent this link or to inspect this link. So what we are doing basically is to stop this illegitimate link or the malware through the DNS. And the end user, at the end of the day, he clicks through the link, but he doesn't know that we stopped it at the DNS level. And all these kind of protections, we are doing it maybe without any, we don't cost the customers, especially the consumers, but in the same times, at least we give a kind of sort of little bit of assurance, at least, that our customers are enjoying secure digital services from our side. I'm sure there are lots of controls, but maybe due to the limited time, this is just a two example.
But this is good to know. Sharif, do you have another question?
Yeah, maybe one final question triggered by my colleague Yasser. So you talked about, DNS, playing a role in security. If I may ask just a general question, I mean, DNS has been there since the inception of the internet. How much, criticality do you see this protocol playing, whether it's in the automated signaling in 5G or in the, cybersecurity or in the kind of content, management? Do how much is DNS on your radar as a technology executive?
Well, nowadays, Sharif, since I would say maybe a year and a half, we start heavily relying on DNSs, especially when it comes to securing the digital ecosystem of the countries. We are blocking hundreds of millions of bad, I would say what we call them in security, command controls, bad links that opens bad traffic between the end users and external, I would say, websites. So we are stopping it at the DNS level. And even we started to introduce this kind of initiatives even to the local regulators. And from our side in Saudi, they start feeding us with intelligence, and we start using the DNS as the first line of defense, or what we call the national shield, to be the first line of defense to protect the digital ecosystem of the nation. And when it comes to cost, it costs nothing, honestly. It costs nothing, and it has a potential of even of monetization. Just to give you an example, parental controls. I'm a father. I'm suffering, honestly, when I install an application in my kids' iPads or laptops, they always uninstall it. So there is a potential control at the DNS level that we could provide to the parents, where they can control what sort of website or activities or time for their kids to spend while browsing the internet. And they can do it with a simple interface that can be provided to the consumers. So nowadays, it's not a matter of the large enterprises, but there are lots of potential services that could be monetized from the DNS itself.
Yeah, thanks, Yasser. Gunther and Hani, do you have any perspective on DNS?
Yes, certainly. I think in a world where you want ultra low latency, DNS is a very important tool to help you deliver it, or where you could fail. So very clearly, if your target is to deliver for your customers the best experience, DNS is very important for you, not only because of the security, but also to provide the low latency that some customers need. And I think especially in bigger countries, that will also make you reconsider network architecture, and you will come to pushing to the edge and distributed architectures also for DNS, so that you have the capability to provide these ultra low latencies. So in my opinion, as part of the transport infrastructure, DNS plays an important role in the 5G world.
Yeah, thanks, Gunter.
So before I hand over back to you, Sharif, to introduce our next keynote speaker, I just wanted to thank our panelists for sharing their time and their insights on this very important topic. And I'm sure we're going to cross paths again in future seminars. So with that, Sharif, do you want to introduce our next speaker?
First, let me say thank you, Jay, and, thank Tony and thank my esteemed colleagues here for, the very insightful, humble, and realistic conversation. There was a lot of insightful, comments and insights for our audience to, understand kind of where we're heading and assess their own roles and their own careers and their career direction. So thank you so much. So we heard a lot about the thinking of what it really means to modernize networks, the technologies used, the skills required. And with that said, please allow me to introduce, David Ayers, our Senior Director of Product Management at Infoblox, who focuses actually on SP. And he will actually, in this first session, focus on what Infoblox is actually doing to help organizations like you and professionals like you actually cope with building and modernizing SP infrastructure with all the concepts that we've heard about. What it really means to secure. How do we really use DNS as a shield and a very low cost first line of defense? What does it really mean to change our philosophy around moving intelligence to the edge in 5G. So there will be a lot of concepts that David would actually talk about, and hopefully you'll find this very fruitful. David, let me hand it to you.
Thank you very much. And Jay, if someone could actually give me sharing permissions, I'll pop up my lovely screen and talk about these things. But I did want to say, first of all, it is an honor to be able to be here with everyone. And I was actually taking down a lot of notes while we were talking. And I think one of the things that first really stood out for me is, I have sharing now, is the fact that we've said it numerous times that really 5G is this first mobile network that operates just like the internet. And that's very, very important because we are talking about this convergence of IT with telco. And I think we've said that numerous times here. And I think this is very important when we're talking about DNS, or the domain name service, which is the major theme for this session. Now that we are dealing with applications and a service-based architecture, providers, we are definitely converging with IT. DNS has become a crucial resource that operators need to manage and distribute just like other critical network functions. DNS's role in taking any application or service function request, mapping the IP address and associating that with an active instantiated resource becomes very critical to the dynamic nature of 5G. So what we're going to do today is examine very briefly 6 critical DNS design requirements for 5G, starting with, I think, as we've mentioned several times, that crucial low latency capability. We're going to look at scaling of, let me advance the slide here, scaling of orders of magnitude. We're going to look at network-wide awareness and the need for IP address management to provide that visibility across these different vendors, domains, and access networks. Then we're going to look at edge security. We're going to look at the secure high-performance control plane implications, which are extremely critical as DNS lookups have to be fast across the control plane. And then finally, we'll look at what all this means from network management in real-time monitoring. So with that said, let's start with low latency. Historically, the perception has been that things have been generally fast on mobile networks. Even with 4G, we could get away with tens, even hundreds of milliseconds of some application responses. But 5G use cases will require extremely low latency. We need to be able to cache DNS address lookups locally. DNS will have to be distributed to maximize the overall system's efficiency without having to traverse the relatively slow internet backbone for each and every request. And we need to have applications that look up and prefetch DNS data before making that connection. So DNS and latency are tightly coupled. If we consider that a typical web page could easily have 20 to 30 graphics tied to that, and each one of them associated with a DNS request. With graphics heavy pages, you can see how this can sort of cascade. So independent of 4G or 5G, having the fastest possible DNS response is critical for subscriber perceived network quality. And it's very simple. Slow DNS means a slow network. Fast DNS means a fast network. So looking at this slide here, latency budgets are, actually, if I go back one, latency budgets are significantly reduced from 4G to 5G. The 4G LTE budget was about 100 milliseconds overall, including the RAN, which accounts for half of that. If we take 5G into absolute terms, the RAN latency will be about 4 to 5 milliseconds, and then tolerance will be about 10 milliseconds depending upon the application. So when comparing DNS solutions, latencies vary approximately 5 milliseconds if you're using open source DNS. If you're using an external DNS provider like a Google or a Cloudflare, you easily have 20 milliseconds. Other vendors are in the range of milliseconds to 5 milliseconds. But Infoblox DNS, we're in the 50 microseconds range on average, as you can see. And on this, another way to look at it is looking at this slide where you see on the left-hand side, LTE budgets along with 5G budgets. And again, Infoblox DNS with DNS cache acceleration is designed to handle future 5G and edge-based applications that require this ultra-low latency, supporting DNS query rates of about 5 million queries per second on a standalone instance, with virtualization technology that can provide that ultra low latency of 50 microseconds on average that you see in that tiny little bit of orange there on the graph. Going to the next requirement, the ability to scale by orders of magnitude. Telcos have been operating in the virtual machine mode for quite a while now, but now we're moving into cloud native microservices. All the service functions, the network functions to provide transactions to one another in real time, to request any functions across the network. We have to scale not at the VM level, but also at the microservices level, spinning up microservice instances in matters of microseconds. Now, this slide is a ladder diagram, but what's curious is that for 5G standards, if you invoke an internet search for the 3-letter term DNS with 5G, you will find very little. As we have talked about with the panel, it's wrong conclusion to think that 5G does not rely on DNS. To have all of these workloads interoperating together in a service-based architecture with thousands, maybe millions of containers, you need DNS. Yes, the HTTPS protocol is governing all of the connections, but DNS plays a critical role. As an example, let's take a look at a very high level at the session management function. So this diagram will show that DNS plays an important role, and having a reliable DNS will be a critical foundation for a service-based architecture. So first, if a workload registers, there's an HTTPS connection. You also need to have a PKI registration for the certificates. And the certificates use a domain name simply because a DNS name is going to be far simpler to manage than an IP address. Once the PKI has been provisioned, the user equipment can connect to the network. The SMF is registered with the network repository function. And when the UE connects to the network, there will be a request of what SMF could be serving that UE. That is returned from the NRF to the access and mobility function. Then the UE uses a DNS name to connect to the session management function. And then later that connection is established for the user plane function, and the subscriber can consume services according to their contract. Now, this leads to our next requirement, network-wide awareness. So we just spoke about the many IP address lookups that need to be occurring for each transaction, but we need an IP address management system to manage and service all of these addresses for this to work. In 4G, this was handled at the packet gateway or some of the network functions in the core internet. It could have even been maintained manually, and actually some operators still do this manually. With the session management function I described earlier, we must automatically instantiate the service management functions with orchestration mechanisms, and then have a containerized network function manager. So now we're in the real-time world of container management. And although in the IPv6 world, network ranges can be quite massive, we want to assign instances to IP addresses dynamically, and they need to be managed automatically. And this can actually get quite tricky. So if we look at how we can automate this, let's go back to talking about the session management function again. And this time, let's pretend that COVID is well behind us. We're sitting in a stadium watching a fantastic goal. We have our phones out. We want to take pictures and send this picture to all of our friends and family. With the capacity of 5G, thousands of football fans can upload the image to their friends. But on the back end, there's still some scaling that has to be done. And once again, the session management function plays a very key role. Our Infoblox IP address management system is key to provision IP addresses in a very fast and automated way. So let's take a look if we do this. If the orchestrator creates a system management function, there is going to be a request to the NFV manager that a container needs to be established. That container needs to have a block of IP addresses allocated that it can hand out to the UEs. That request is going to go to the Infoblox IP address management system, an authoritative database. It's going to have an overview of the network's entire IP space and ensuring that there will be no addressing conflicts. So the right IP block is allocated and the SM container can be instantiated and service connections for the customers. But what happens when the match is actually over? The stadium is dark, everyone's gone home. Well, the network has to then be adjusted to reclaim that capacity as no longer needed. The SMS will be destroyed and the IP address management system can deallocate those IP addresses. The orchestrator will initiate an automatic deletion of the SMF. Within the IP address management system, that block will be freed for future use by another SMF in another stadium. Now looking at security, thousands of new locations, as we've talked about before in the panel, increase the potential for security threats, both from third-party applications at the edge, driving the need for edge security. We're going to have distributed computing, which for telcos dramatically changes how they need to manage security because the threat surface is now much, much larger. And DNS, as we've discussed in prior discussions, plays a critical role in protecting the network, plus all the application services. And it's essential to leverage DNS to preempt an attack before they even get into the network. And we're all familiar with firewalls, but there are many holes in firewalls, and all too often, they actually block an attack after the attack is already underway. And in particular with IoT, DNS is one of the best ways to stop a distributed denial of service attack. And this allows us to look at DNS in the sense that it needs to become a virtual as an enhanced security function where edge security and privacy can generate the security of the network and become a critical part of revenue for the service providers. The attack surface obviously is going to increase a lot. You will see that the number of radios will increase over 3 times. We mentioned Open RAN earlier. With Open RAN, all these antennas will have a little piece of NFVI that will require TCP/IP connectivity, and that also needs defended. We also see that telcos are taking advantage of public cloud providers to provide access to areas where those providers may already have better established footprints. We're moving outside the physical buildings and the telco's perimeter into third-party locations and cloud hosting, creating new security posture that requires defense. But last and not least, massive internet connectivity. With IoT, we can expect significantly greater numbers of network devices. And remember, it's challenging to keep IoT devices safe on the internet. With typical IoT, updating devices with the latest security patches is challenging. With IoT, security embedded within the network becomes an even more significant thing as the surface increases. Fortunately, DNS is an excellent control plane in this sense. In this example, let's assume that we have 2 telephones, a blue phone and a red phone. The blue phone, for all intents and purposes, is not infected, and the red phone is an infected client where a botnet has happened to take control of the device. So let's assume that the blue phone, the subscriber, is conscious of security. They keep their device software up to date, they're updating their firmware, but still the subscriber receives an email telling them that they won the lottery, along with a URL that the subscriber inadvertently clicks on, and it goes to www.malware.com. Luckily, in this case, the DNS request goes to the secure Infoblox server that leverages our reputational feeds that show that malware.com is in fact a malicious site. We prevent the subscriber from going there. We redirect them to a web page instead and let them know that we averted a possible attack. But in the second example, on the red phone, this is an already infected client, which more or less is lost and it's in control of the botnet herder. But this infected device has to communicate with the command and control center to receive its malicious commands, which requires a DNS request. So even from an infected client, we can detect that the connection to the command and control center has been made. We can prevent that connection. And that means that the malicious payload that might order an attack to others, let's say a denial of service attack or to send spam, will not be received by the infected clients, and the malicious payload is not on the network. A vital aspect of this is the Infoblox threat intelligence feed. This is what helps us block those infectious communications or the malicious communications to CNCs, blocking phishing, ransomware, and other exploits, preventing malware from propagating. We can set policies based on the identity of subscriber or the device. For instance, we can take the device IMEI or other identifiers that service providers use on the network. Policies can be personalized and can not only be related to malware and command and control, but also to things that we also just discussed: parental controls, corporate content policies, things where ethics and beliefs come into play much more than security. On this next requirement, the requirement for a secure high-performance control plane is an extremely hot topic with service providers. We already have a control plane that functions over HTTP protocols for many transactions in real time, which require an extremely fast response. We see a dramatic increase in the scale of control plane transactions and need to consider how to be able to scale this while maintaining very low latency. And from all the examples I just showed you in the ladder diagrams, there was a lookup to find the virtualized resources active instance for the service or a network function. But complicating these things are two new DNS privacy protocols that you're probably aware of: DNS over TLS or DOT, and DNS over HTTPS or DO, which will create numerous problems for service providers. Now, while DOT and DO were designed to address DNS privacy issues for consumers, they introduce significant DNS behavior changes to how browsers and applications actually function. These changes create a lot of additional complexity and unintended network consequences for the providers. Now, the providers have invested heavily in their networks to ensure safe, reliable experience for their customers. The important thing is that DOT and DO can point servers and applications to external DNS resolvers outside of the telco's control, allowing subscriber devices to sidestep these traditional DNS mechanisms that are employed by the providers to services outside and expose subscribers to potential risks and negative customer experiences. This could break existing service provider on-net content distribution services, cybersecurity controls, content controls, and even hamper government-mandated content restrictions. A potential problem with DO is, of course, that it uses the same TCP port 443, that all HTTPS traffic uses. So this might prove rather challenging for providers to troubleshoot DO-related DNS issues because of this ability, or this inability, rather, to distinguish DO-based DNS requests from regular HTTPS requests. So what's important to understand is that DO is not going away. In fact, it's being deployed on production networks. It's being deployed on subscriber devices right now at this moment. And you need to get ahead of this. So the best way to mitigate the effects of DO is to deploy a DNS over HTTPS server on your own network. Our encrypted DNS provides efficient encryption while delivering best-in-class DNS services, which allow these providers to remain in control over their DNS. In fact, when we've talked about this at recent events in the last 2 weeks, DO is the #1 question that was coming in from our participants. So the telcos seem to be very keen on this one. Our last requirement deals with multiple domains and multiple domain monitoring management. And this is ironically not just a headache where there are numerous mobile and fixed domains, but where we have IP networks, good old internet that has to operate across countries or regions where we now in most enterprise environments have a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud domain. And handling these capabilities, as we've been talking about across all of these domains, with the domain system, domain name system is a critical aspect. What we have to be able to deal with are centralized edge domains, which may be private, could be on-prem, they might just be even managed services, but maybe just they need to be able to operate all across these diverse domains with a common IP management system and be able to integrate them with automated tools for tracking, which is going to be extremely essential. We will end up with a multi-cloud world, and I think we're already there. And that is a challenge to keep an overview across these multiple environments, across Amazon, Azure, private clouds will all be out there. And there will be tons of different orchestration applications and platforms to manage all of these virtual workloads. But what will be essential to make it happen and make it work seamlessly together is, again, an authoritative IP address management system and a DNS layer. But also key will be an API access from the orchestration layer to this IP address management system. We actually deliver this as well. We have the APIs that orchestrators can tap into and instantiate and terminate and allocate the IP space and terminate and reclaim addresses when they're no longer needed, much like our stadium example earlier. We have the discovery engines that go into the cloud infrastructure and represent the reality of the workloads deployed on these public clouds and give a consistent visibility overview of what is out there and assure, most importantly, that the IP address allocation will not result in duplicate addresses and errors and downtime. And when we talked about this earlier, it made me very happy because we've started thinking about this. Another example of this multi-cloud scenario is Open RAN. So every Open RAN provider will probably come with a management platform to manage their antennas and their workloads. But this result, as you see with the different, 3 different vendors we have on the screen here, you're going to end up with multiple Open RAN providers in the radio access network, thus creating a multi-cloud problem. The good news is that with the Infoblox API and with our authoritative database, we can become essentially the Switzerland for all the IP address administration. And we can assure these islands of Open RAN that they will basically be able to seamlessly work together, that there will be no IP addressing conflicts within these different Open RAN islands. So before I said there were 6 requirements, in talking to Sharif, I decided to add a 7th requirement at the end there, and that is flexibility. As we've already discussed, 5G and edge deployments will be highly virtualized and automated. We were talking about the importance of network function virtualization, but there's also going to be containerization, software-defined networking. Will be employed to take these services much closer to the edge. And considering the dynamic nature of virtualization, one of the critical things that telcos need is the ability to serve DNS far closer. And traditionally, when you got closer to the edge from a carrier-based world, that meant adding more appliances further on the network. And typically this increased the number of appliances that were required. So when we talked about the ability to push out to the edge, to allocate, to deallocate automatically, our service provider license agreement goes hand in hand, or SPLA, is a way to serve service provider needs cost effectively and scalably to handle the dynamic nature of their new deployments. It's a single agreement that covers a relationship between Infoblox and our service provider customers, providing unlimited virtual machine deployment with all licensable features activated organization-wide. Better yet, it leverages a capacity-based, what we call as a pay-as-you-grow pricing model, so that the providers don't have to pay for the capacity that isn't being used while still solving the issue of these capacity limitations. It just makes the ability, if you go back to that stadium example, if you have to scale up very quickly and very dramatically, you have that ability. You don't have to deal with contracts. You don't have to deal with installing all of these things. It's just simply going to be able to work for you. And with that said, Jay, at the end of this one presentation, I need to switch over. So if you can take it for a moment, please.
Actually,
Sharif. Thank you.
Yep. So thank you so much, David, for sharing with the audience some of these important concepts. So we talked about, the role of DNS as it plays in the modernization and the security of new kind of infrastructures, service provider infrastructures. We talked about, authoritative IPAM as a concept for helping with automation and governance. We talked about the important need for new licensing models that is not really charging organizations based on, the number of sites and the number of virtual machines or appliances, but it's actually more around consumption and that flexibility of pay as you grow. So that kind of concludes our first session around what we're doing as an organization to help customers in the service provider sector, take more kind of control and really, facilitate their change to embracing some of these trends and some of these new concepts, specifically as we move from telco mindset to IT mindset, and as we move from a centralized deployment models to pushing things at the edge to ensure that the customer experience and the user experience and the user quality are really prime. Now we're going to segue into another, quick session where we'll focus on the type of services that we're helping organizations deploy to monetize new revenue streams. Yasser alluded to parental controls, and there are other things that you can really do now by using control plane technologies like DNS rather than actually data plane technologies very expensive like DPI. So with that said, David, why don't you take us through some of these concepts around the new services that we can help organizations embrace and roll out?
I guess Jay has the agenda. Let's talk of the agenda of Jay, Sharif, if you don't mind, because he has the agenda. If he has anything to add, then we will go as per your suggestion, I guess. Jay, please, do you have anything, or we go by your suggestion?
Yeah, rather in the 3 minutes we have left, if David, you can give your final thoughts rather than presentation in terms of that wrap up, final thoughts that you wanted to give, and then we can thank the panel. Hani has had to drop again. He asked me to thank you on his behalf about the opportunity to sit with you on that panel.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna show one slide, and I'm just gonna speak to this slide. How about that? We talked a lot about the value-added use cases that can be provided leveraging DNS, and I know we talked about parental controls, things like that. But for me, I was a product manager at a large telecoms provider for several years. I used to sell. I was a product manager. And as a product manager, developing these value-added work streams or these value-added services to put on top of my services was very, very critical, and was actually a very difficult type of a task because of developing the business case, forecasting out for 3 to 5 years to be able to develop these services. What's really impressed me is that DNS, as I think we've alluded to during the panel, is one of those vehicles that allows you to put these services out cost effectively. I can do this reliably, and I can do this at 5G scale, which is going to be, I think, very, very critical moving forward. And especially as I can't remember which speaker talked about that, but that 5G is going to sort of cross over from the wireless to the traditional wireline type of business case, so that I'm going to be serving internet services to traditional wireline households. Leveraging DNS allows you to hit these use cases plus even more. We talked about safe internet as almost as a clean pipe type of solution. You can then layer on top of that, and I might do the safe internet for free, and just to give my subscribers that peace of mind. But then layer on top of that parental controls, and maybe charge a nominal fee for that. Maybe layer on advertisement blocking. But I can target this at different segments. If I want a business segment, I can target IoT with this. I can target educational protection for this. I could talk to you for another hour about this, but I know I don't have the time. What I do want to say is that the people I work with here at Infoblox are some of the best I've seen in the business. So if you have additional questions after this session today, I implore you to please reach out. We would love to be able to talk to you about this. But DNS is such a very powerful tool to be able to provide these value-added services. So I just wanted to say that. Unless Sharif, unless you had anything to add to that, sir. I don't think he did. All right, Jay, back to you.
Okay, great. So I think I'm just going to wrap up with the final couple of words. Here we talked about the impact of 5G. We talked about the services and the security and the role of DNS. And I think in this case, David, you have showcased the importance of that and what Infoblox is doing in that space. So there is a lot more, and I'm sure if we wanted, we can spend the whole day workshop talking about this. But I hope this has given our audience at least a baseline of the things to look at moving forward. So with that, I do appreciate your time and your insights again, and very warm welcome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Seeing you all again.
Thank you. Hopefully soon.